Nusem.
Okay, welcome. How is everyone? Everyone's all psyched up for another SydDT? So welcome to SydDT number 104. And we're lucky to be talking about inclusive design tonight. So to kick off, I just want to acknowledge that we're on Gadigal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Since it's inclusion, I thought it might be interesting to spend a couple of seconds, and I think you've actually already been doing this, so we'll keep it pretty short, but talk to the person next to you, make a new friend if you haven't already, ideally someone that you don't know, and all sitting together in a cluster. Ask each other's names, why you're here and what inclusive design means to you. I hate breaking up the great conversation. It works in kindergarten rooms, but not so much at SydDT. Awesome, so if you hadn't already made some new friends, I hope you've made some now. So just want to say a quick thanks to our sponsors as well, and we'll kick off with a thanks from Atlassian by Stokesy.
Hello, I'm Sarah Stokes, and I'd like to thank you all for coming today and enjoying this lovely space we have here. We're going to be using the space again for the festive mega meetup on the 28th of November, so we hope to see you there. And we also run a monthly event for creative customer experience at 341 George Street with Atlassian on the first Tuesday of every month. And second Tuesday of every month. And you're going to have to remember what the subject is: education for the... the new educational model for tomorrow's leaders. The new educational model for tomorrow's leaders with Charbel on that date, which is the 13th of November. 12th. I'm doing really well. But thanks everyone for coming. I'm really looking forward to this subject. So thank you to our speakers as well.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Huge thanks to Atlassian for hosting us. I'm Ben, by the way. Hi. I'm from Dynamic 4. We're a social enterprise and B Corp, and everything we do is focused on how do we use leadership, design and innovation to help create the conditions for people and communities to be happier and live on a nice, healthy, clean planet. So if that's something that is of interest, come and have a yarn. The people who bring this to you every month is this little lineup. So Kate's not with us tonight. You've probably met Lucas on the door, and I can't see him waving at the moment. Oh, there he is. And Kylie's right next to him. And I'm Ben, as I said. Awesome. And the reason we do this is because of all of you. So this is number 104. And as at this morning, we're at 9,634 members. So you're amongst good company. And thanks a lot for being part of the community. If you want to do socials and stuff, hashtag. If you want to continue the conversation after tonight, then chat.syddt.org is our LinkedIn group. And this is part one of tonight. We go to the pub after. So tonight, we're going to try and mix it up a bit. We're going to go to the CBD hotel. We normally go to the Oki, but the CBD is a bit closer. If that's too packed, we'll go around the corner back to the Oki. But CBD after this. So we've got plenty coming up to close out the year. Hopefully people have seen my messages about South by Southwest Sydney, which kicks off on Monday. And so we've got a meetup which will be in Tumbalong Park, so it's in the public space of South by. So you don't need a badge to come along. It is at 3:15 on Monday Arvo. So bail out of work. It is a work thing. So it'll be nice and casual. It's in the middle of Tumbalong Park.
Team building event.
It's team building, so bring a team. / create a new one. And it's right next to a big, massive, giant vending machine in the park, which is full of whiskey, and next to a gin bar as well. So grab a drink, and we'll be in the Ideas Dome little space, and it'll just be a casual hangout. And if you're going to South By, it'll be a good break from the content. And if you aren't doing anything at South By, then it's a good chance to come and hang out for a bit. Awesome.
And then say you went there.
And so you went and get photos by signage and stuff. The next normal SydDT we've got coming up is on the 6th of November. It's on a Wednesday, which is not our normal rhythm. And we're really lucky to have Macquarie hosting us. So hey Jen. So Jen and Steve from Macquarie are hosting us, and the theme is State of the Design Nation, so it's the annual tradition that we've got, which is a bit of a highlight of the Good Design Awards. So Ben Crothers has been doing it since 2018, and then this year we've got Nila co-presenting with him as well. So it'll be their highlights as a couple of the judges from the Good Design Awards, and we'll even have a bunch of people. In fact, there's some people in the room tonight who were Good Design Award winners. Not looking at anyone in particular. So it's a bit of a celebration of all things design, looking at sort of trends and insights and different things coming up, which it's always a fun night, and thanks to Macquarie for hosting that one next month. And then we've got our end of year one, which Stokesy just mentioned, which will be back here on the 28th, literally in this room. And both of those November ones are actually part of our mega meetup series. So it's Design Connection, which is CCX, EUX, and SydDT, and we sort of come together, combine all of our communities, and have a big love in. So they're always fun when we go mega. So that'll be those two, and then to kick off 2025 in style, and to tell us all about Shapeshifters, we've got Diana and Alan from Shapeshifters. And they're going to tell us about the graphic recording as well.
Hi everyone.
Hi everyone. I'm Diana, this is Alan. We're from Shapeshifters. We're a creative agency based in Sydney. We help teams communicate internally and externally through visual storytelling. So we support them in their change management journey, their strategy, and a lot of other things through illustration. And we have been very lucky to be involved with student design thinking for the past few months. We've been sponsoring scribes to come up and sketchnote or graphic record the speakers and the talks that have been happening. And what that means is they, in real time, take notes that are visual, and so that you have at the end of the event, you'll have a visual summary, a visual takeaway of the event. So come up and take photos, and Alan will introduce Erez.
Yes. So tonight we have Erez, who is going to be. Erez is a super talented service designer. He's also an amazing visual thinker, so you definitely have a chat to him. No. I was going to say definitely take photos and definitely talk to him afterwards, because he'll have a lot to share.
I was just also going to say that we also run a meetup that happens every second Wednesday of the month in the mornings. It's called Think Visual. You can find it on Eventbrite, but also October is New South Wales Small Business Month, and we're running a few events part of that. So a few master classes for improving your presentations and mapping out your business. So if you're interested in some things like that, find us on Eventbrite. We're Shapeshifters with an 8 instead of an A, so the shape. There's an 8, so it's SH8. So it's a little bit hard, but you can come up and chat to us afterwards.
And one last thing. So next year, to kick things off for Sydney Design Thinking, we will be running a practical workshop that kind of gives you visual thinking tools and skills to help you organize your thinking. So if you're interested in what you see tonight, if you'd like to kind of think with clarity, we'll be starting the year off with something really fun and hopefully very practical for all of you.
Okay. So you'll be able to visualise your New Year's resolutions that have already lapsed in February. So that is the 13th of February. It's not Valentine's Day, but it's almost. So there you go. So if you want to hit that QR code, that'll take you to the meetup page. You'll be able to jump on all the things coming up. But that's all coming up. Now we get to live in the now. And it's awesome to have 3 speakers tonight. So there she is, Manisha. And we've got Shaheen and Maz, or Mariane, or Power.
Stop it.
So we're going to do sort of 3 shortish back-to-back talks, and then we'll have a little panel to sort of have a chat about it. So I think the speakers are all good with you shouting out questions as you've got them, as we're in flow. But if you've got longer questions, then save them up for your when we do the panel. And questions are something that is not a monologue with an inflection and a question mark at the end. It's actually asking something because you're curious, not a monologue. So we're going to do those kinds of questions. All good?
Yeah.
Excellent. So to kick us off, welcome Manisha.
Hello, my name is Manisha, and I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about myself. So, you've heard my name. I came to Australia when I was 5 years old, and I live in a place called Maroubra. It's also known as Maraori land or Bidjigal land. So until 2 years ago, I'd call it Gadigal land, actually. And while doing some research, I realised that the people who used to live there actually had their own tribes, their own names, their own customs. And when, I don't know how many of you know Maroubra, it's on the eastern suburbs, but when I come out of my house and hang out to the right, past the flats, there's a bit of bush. And if I walk into that bush and round the curve at the top of the heads there's a place called Magic Point. And when you stand on Magic Point and look down, that's where the great nurse sharks are. One of the last remaining lots of sharks. We killed them off because they looked like jaws. But there's some down there. And the local communities knew about them, right? And if I look to the right, I can see Botany Bay, where those first ships came through. Some of those ships actually landed in Calcutta beforehand. They were made in India. There were Indian people on those crews. Captain Philip was over there before he came over here. I came here from Kenya because of colonisation, and I've really benefited from colonisation on the backs of people who didn't have a choice about whether I came here or not. And those people are people I'd like to acknowledge and respect today, especially when we think about inclusion and inclusive design. And so both myself, Shaheen and Maz would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the people who've welcomed us and who've taught me so much about what it means to be excluded, but also what it means to be included. So, on that note, we're going to be talking today about inclusive design and neurodiversity as a subset of that. And the way we've designed is 3 of us had a bit of a chat, and we decided that we'd all take a little bit of the puzzle, if you like. So I'm going to start with what inclusive design is to me anyway, and why it's important. And then Shaheen's going to really talk about the part that we never hear in design conversations, which is that piece around power, privilege, what diversity is really about. And then Mariane, Maz. Thank you.
That's why we have Maz.
That's why we have Maz. And Maz is then going to give us what is in effect a bit of a case study on one particular group, because when we think about inclusion, we're not all the same, and not everything about inclusion is the same. So we're going to focus on neurodiversity and neuro inclusion as well. So if you'd like to ask us questions, feel free to do that as we go or at the end. Sometimes it's a bit awkward halfway through, but just whack your hand up and we'll take it from there. But I'd like to start by going back in time a little bit. And we're going back to the British Raj. You can see there's a bit of an Indian thing going on. And you might have heard this before, but there's this story. So we're back in the British Raj, and they had a problem. It was a health problem. It wasn't COVID at the time. It was a pandemic of a different type. There was one related to these things, cobras and snake bites. And people, some of you know this story, I can see some nods here. But basically what was happening was people were dying of snake bites. Okay? And so the powers that be, you know, the colonialists, I guess, or the East India Company, I'm going to say, basically wanted to fix this. So it's probably after East India Company, but they wanted to fix this. And so they said, look, what we're going to do is put in an incentive program, you know, because they work really well, right? And so the incentive program was that people would get, I'm going to say 100 rupees for every dead cobra. So it worked really well, right? There were all these dead cobras coming in, all these 100 rupees going out, going gangbusters. There was only one problem. When they looked at like the lead and lag indicators, they noticed that there were more people dying of snake bites than ever before. So they thought maybe it would be worth actually finding out what was going on from the community. And so some of the juniors went down and they actually started speaking to people. And what they found out was, lo and behold, Indians were somewhat entrepreneurial. And it was like, if you were going to be a farmer, if you were getting 100 rupees for a dead cobra, it was actually more cost effective and better for like margin wise than other products like food. So people were setting up cobra farms. Oh my God. And so, of course, that's not what people wanted. So when these researchers went back and said, look, there's cobra farms, they were like, oh, that's not what we want, so we cancelled the incentive. And, you know, these people, they didn't kill snakes just for the fun of it, they killed them because of the money. So if there's no money, they just let them go. So Erez Nusem talks about this, and it's a theory that he calls the cobra effect. And the cobra effect is actually when we do something because we think it will be good and helpful, but it has unintended negative consequences. So we can think of a lot of these things that have happened over the time. Can anyone name something like this in Australia? Cane toads. Sorry?
Rabbits.
Rabbits? Cane toads, rabbits. Robo-death? So there are lots of things that are unintended consequences, and I think this is really important when we think about inclusive design, because one of the ways that we can stop this from happening is by talking to the people that we might not have been speaking to, who might de-bias us so that we're not coming up with a solution that might work in our brains but doesn't actually work in the market. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I found out about this myself, and I guess the way that I got into this. I started with a job that I was at the time, and I was trying to work out what the best thing to do was, and I met this bloke, and his name, I'm going to call him Bob. He had this amazing smile that light up a room. And I basically just said, look, if we're working in an area that would help you, what would that be? And he said, well, I just want to finish a job. I want to get a degree on course. I need to get, I need to study in order to get a job so that I can, fulfill my life. I was like, yep, that's great. What do you want a job in? And he said, I don't care. And I said, well, what do you want a course in? I don't care. Well, what have you tried? I've tried 7 courses and I've never finished them. So this is going back to 2018, this conversation. And I remember thinking to myself, well, you've got to apply yourself to finish a course, and you actually have to put in the hours that go with doing the work. But that wasn't the case. You see, Bob was actually deaf. And whenever he started a course, he was actually also an Auslan user. So this is in Sydney, and he lived up the coast. And whenever he started a course, whether it was at TAFE or at university, of those 7, every single time, at some point in the course, they said, sorry, we don't have enough money for an Auslan interpreter. And therefore he couldn't finish his course. And the next day, I actually went to an event. And it wasn't a fun event like this, no. It was around Australian telecommunications and consumer rights. It wasn't something I was overly excited by, but I have never been so engaged by a presentation before. And it wasn't because they had the flashy lights and the great speakers, it wasn't because of the razzmatazz. What it was about was actually, they had a transcription machine going. and they had an offline interpreter, and they had someone talking, and they had slides, and whenever my mind wanders, as it tends to, I could catch up by looking at the text. Or I could look at the other person, the interpreter, and actually look at what they were doing visually while listening to what the person was saying. Or look at the slides. It was an immersive experience. And I realised that if we just designed for Bob, we'd make the world better for all of us. And when we think about innovation and what that means, by making the world better, we're actually designing, and if we design it inclusively, it's not just about designing something because it's a good thing to do. It's about actually making it better for all of us, especially when we think about the fourth industrial revolution. We're at an inflection point at the moment, you know, and we're creating things in ways that are new and unimaginable. We don't know what the future will hold, but we do know what the past looks like and the mistakes we made. So we design against those. We'll at least make it a little bit better than it is today. And you know, this movement has been going on for a while. This is one of my favourite photos of all time. It's actually a photo of a group of people in wheelchairs, and the man in the front with the beard, his name is Ed Roberts, and this is Ed Roberts and the Rolling Quads. Sounds like some sort of random band from the 60s. The only thing that's right is they were in the 60s. And basically, they're a group of protesters. The photo is dark because this was taken in the night time. And what they're doing, or what he's doing at the front, is he's got a hammer in his hand and he's breaking that footpath down. So these weren't the only people who did this, but this was one of the seminal groups that started this movement around disability rights. Okay? And basically, Ed was going to university at the time. He'd gotten into Berkeley and he was doing a course. His biggest problem was he couldn't get from his dorm room to his classes because of these pesky things called curbs or curb cuts in America, or curbs in America, and then curb cuts is what he's making. And they started by knocking them down in the middle of the night and putting ramps in. They protested at town hall until finally curb cuts became something that were mandatory. We know them as driveways, you know, pathways, and they don't just work if you're in a wheelchair. They actually work for all of us. It works for our cars. It works if we've got prams. It works if we've got little children. So this is what we often call temporary situational disability rather than medical disability. So back in the day when we thought about disability, and I'll talk about disability a lot when I talk about inclusion today because of design. And because when we think about design, we're often thinking about looking, seeing and feeling the experience, right? And the greatest kryptonite and the greatest strengths around those physical aspects come from people with disability. So it's a great place to start that conversation. So when we think about what that means, if I asked you to design a great door, you might design, or a door for the future. You might design a door that has holograms on it. You might design a door that opens in a slightly different way. But if you can't use this door today, chances are you'll design a door that has different functionality, that is a better experience, that is more seamless. And that's what this is about. And when we think about working with people from the edge, people who the world hasn't worked for, it makes real sense because these people always have that problem. And humans are incredible. We're really great at hacking the system. So what we do is when we work with people on the edge, it's not just about going, tell me your problem and I'll solve it. It's going, how have you solved your problem? What do you think might work? A sighted person would never have designed Braille. And if you're ever interested in that story, there's a great podcast, 99% Invisible. They have a great episode just on the design of Braille. But when we think about the things that have been designed, flexible straws, or a love letter from a father to his daughter who couldn't use her hands and wanted to have a milkshake. We've sort of curb cuts. How many of you use flexible electric toothbrushes? A few of you? Yeah, a fair number of us. Electric toothbrushes are known to actually be better at brushing teeth sometimes than non-electric toothbrushes. How many of you actually can't use your hands Yeah, not that many, right? So electric toothbrushes were first invented in hospitals because when nurses had to brush people's teeth, they'd brush the first 2 or 3 people really well, but you can imagine having to brush 15, 20 people's teeth. Your hand gets tired, you're not brushing so well, and they were seeing an increased prevalence of tooth decay in patients, and that's when the first electric toothbrushes were designed. Oxo Good Grips were designed by the partner of the CEO of Oxo. So these are all products that we all use now that were designed through using inclusive design. And so what is inclusive design? The first thing I'd like to say is that for me, inclusive design is not accessibility. Okay? So often when we talk about inclusive design, especially in Australia, we go down to that level, the very practical level. What I'd like to say or posit is that inclusive design is any design that considers the full range of human experience, so age, race, gender, ability. It could actually be the cis white man that you need to include sometimes as well. Right? So there's no one who is always included and there's no one who is always excluded, depending on what we're talking about. So inclusive design should be context dependent. In Australia, I've also put in some of those things that factors around vulnerability, location, because location really matters. So all of those things as well. And we design inclusively so that we get better experiences for everyone, not just the people who have missed out. So it is actually a flip in the way we think. Does that make sense to people? I'm seeing some confused looks there. That makes sense? Yes. Okay. And so when we think about inclusive design, or when I think about inclusive design, I use a model that has come from Jutta Treviranus from the Inclusive Design Research Centre in Canada. They have taken this from the technology world. But we think about 3 different dimensions. And the first one is recognising diversity and uniqueness. And both Shaheen and Naz are going to talk about this one in particular a little bit more. But it's this idea that we're all different, and when we're designing, we're always including someone, and we're always excluding someone, right? No design includes everyone all the time. We build our products to be exclusive. The challenge is, who are you designing it for? So if we design it without knowing who we're missing out, that's where the problem is. I can see some scrunched up faces. So an example for me is if we design a cup with a handle on it, that cup only works for someone who can lift a cup. Okay? So it will always work better for someone than somebody else, but we need to know who that is or why we're doing it. If you design a cup for children with those 2 handles and a sippy lip on it, it will work for little children, but it might not work for you in an office environment. So it always works for someone more than somebody else. The second one is where we normally focus, right? Which is the tools and the techniques. And this is where accessibility, co-design, participatory design, all of those tools that we use to work with different people come in. So that's this idea of nothing about us without us. So when we talk about human-centered design, who is the human that we choose to put in the center of our design? And why have we chosen that human specifically? And which human have we chosen not to include in our design? And then how do we work with these humans in ways that actually work for them rather than for us? So as a designer, some of the things that I like to think about is, where am I actually having my session? Is it extractive? How much am I giving of myself when I'm asking that person to give me of themselves? Especially their experience. And do I really, really need to know what type of eyesight problem they have? If I'm looking at building a cup, like, do I really need to know what their problem is? Or do I just need to know what my problem is? So there's some of the things that we think about when we're thinking about designing or doing research. And then the last one, which I think is the most important, is actually understanding the system. Right? So we can't change everything all the time, all at once. The world doesn't work like that. And we live in a world that's based on the past, right? And the biases that have come from the past. And a good example of this would be something like AI, right? So you and I could be highly inclusive in the way we think. We might believe, for instance, that gender is a spectrum. And we're a designer and we're working from that perspective. But the data points in the world, 99% of them have gender as binary. So even though we might have the right mentality or the right way of thinking, the system around us might not. Or you can make a classroom, a teacher can make it a space inclusive for one student, or change a system for one student, but then how does that fit in with the whole class? And then how does that fit in with the rest of the school? And then how does that school fit in with the rest of the system? So I think it's always important to remember that systems are important, and the way we think about systems are important, and what levers we're pushing are important. Because we can't change everything all at once, but we do need to know what we can and can't change. And so when we think about this, and we think about humans, this slide here, it's an amalgam of two slides actually. One is a bell curve, but flattened out. So if you're looking at a flattened, if you squash a bell curve down, imagine this is your customer set, right? And most customer sets, if you think about them like that bell curve, they look something like this. And the question that was asked here, this was in 2003, and the question was from Microsoft, and they said, how does our technology work for you? Does our technology work for you? And there's something really interesting about this picture, and obviously it's just a picture, but when you think about this, in terms of the way these dots are placed. So imagine these dots are humans. Is there anything that you notice immediately about those dots? Which one looks like it's got the biggest number of people? Probably the middle? Yeah. And which one has the people who are closest to each other? The middle. So if you're doing research and you find 5 or 10 people in the middle who say your product's pretty good, you're probably going to think you've got a pretty good group. And if you have 10 people in the middle who say your product's really good and only one person who's an outlier, you're still going to think your product's pretty good, I would. Because that's kind of how these things work. And the problem on the edges, where the design doesn't work, is not only are people far away from the middle, they're actually really far away from each other. Right? So they look like anomalies on a lot of different ways. So no two people, when you think about diversity, like a diversity spectrum, none of us are the same. None of us think the same, none of us have the same experiences. So you can't generalise on the people on the edge, and it's harder to find the right people on the edge as well sometimes. When this work was done though, one of the interesting things is the design actually worked for about 21% of people. We see this reflected in the work we've done as well. And the design didn't work for about 25% of people. Now about 18% of people identify as having a disability, so you probably assume some of those are in that last group, but there's more than that in that group. The challenge is if you're only designing for the middle, where the design really works for you, you're getting in 21%. If you design for some of the people on the outside, and I wouldn't say you design for all of the people on the outside, that's a bit difficult, but you can design for some of them and broaden what your design looks like, whether it's a policy or process or a building, it doesn't really matter. So if you design on the outside, you're getting some of those people in the middle, where your design might work, but it's just shitty to use. You know, or I might use it, I can use it, but I'd rather not use it, not complain about it. Or I'll work around it. And this is really important when we think about not only the design on the edge, but who we're choosing and how we're choosing, because actually we're all diverse, right? And so these are some statistics from Australia around what we all look like. So if I asked you to think about the last mainstream product you were, or process, or technology, or whatever it is, or policy that you were designing, and think about how many of you have experienced a disability, for instance, or know someone with a disability. Hands up if that's the case. Yeah. And keep your hand up if the last mainstream product that you designed or thought about, you actually had that person in mind. So can you see how different that is? And if we were able to do that, and often some of the reasons we don't do that are because we don't have time, the money's not there, we can't find the people, etc. So if we could change our system so that we could have that, then life would be a lot better for all of us. And the beauty of this is actually when we think about some of the trends that we have at the moment, the future is technology. And the benefit of technology, sometimes we talk about the difference between universal design and inclusive design. For us, inclusive design, universal design would be like the pavement, one size fits all. Inclusive design is like your phone. It's personalised. Because we are in the era of hyper-personalisation. So rather than talking about workplace adjustments, we often say, well, what about just talking about personalisation? Some people like standing desks, or moving desks, or desks without chairs. Well, if you're a wheelchair user, that's what you need. But actually, I like that too, because I've got a bit of bad back today. Or, so it's a personalisation, which destigmatises. And we've seen emerge for the first time between the real world and the imagined world. Often our brains can't tell the difference. Some of the superheroes and the people with kryptonite in these areas are potentially older people. Again, disability comes into it. I've not seen anyone hack their body the way some people with disability have. If I need to learn how to use my phone, I normally go to a friend of mine, Darren Fittler. He's at Gilbert and Tobin. He happens to be blind, but he uses that phone like nothing I've ever seen. And we've done the research. Inclusive design can be 3 to 4 times the intended audience. That's not just because of the people who have been left out, but because your products are better than they used to be. And when we think about that, so if we think about how that looks, how many of us have a smartphone in this room? Most of us? Yeah. Keep your hands up if you think you use your phone exactly the same way as somebody else. Exactly the same way. So how do you use your phone? Exactly the same way? So you use your buttons the same way? Yeah, amazing. So the two of you probably be, and a couple of other people, right? So there you go. Okay, so you don't think so? Yeah. So
yeah, but the whole thing, no.
Like how you use it. So this is the thing, because the phones have so much in them these days, right? They're not just one path for everyone. And the way that happens, if it wasn't for voiceover, we may never have had Siri. The first, not that the technology was exactly the same, but the imagination that came from voiceover, that was designed way before. The first gesture control technology came from people with carpal tunnel. A lot of the research that has been done around pinch technology has come from people with hand issues. You think about where Apple are going now, they're transforming from a communications device into a health device. Okay? And that is also linked to their, the privacy and everything else they wrap around it because of that. When you think about some of these things, they've come from this idea of inclusive design. Designing for different people, for different paths, and adding it together. And technology allows us to have different paths for different people. We don't all have the same well, except for maybe this gentleman here. We don't necessarily all have the same Netflix recommendations as the person next to us. We don't have the same book recommendations. We can personalise our workplaces differently. And so this is where inclusive design really starts to see. And there are consequences to getting it wrong, right? So we've talked about some of the benefits of inclusive design. This is just one example. Do people know what this thing is? You might have seen these around COVID time. It's an oximeter that sits on your finger. Does anyone know why I've got this one up here? Do you know the story? Okay, so, well, interesting. It does measure, I think it measures the oxygen in your blood. The first oximeters were designed by Hewlett-Packard back in the day. It was World War II, and they were actually they were used for defence when the planes were up to make sure that pilots didn't fall down die. Okay, because when they went up too high. And so it was for the Germans and the Americans. And what they realised was that the machines that they were making were better able to detect blood levels in pale skins rather than dark skins. So when they did their research, they actually had 244 African American people who were darker in their mix. The machines were big, clunky, expensive, but they worked pretty well. They then moved into technology, let's move forward many years, and the new oximeters were actually first designed in Japan, where they had a heterogeneous population, and they decided that colour wasn't as big an issue. We've known for many years that the oximeters that are being used in hospitals and systems and that you buy at the shop actually are biased towards lighter skins. If you've got a dark skin, you get a false positive that you're okay. So we've known this, right? But it's expensive to fix, except this thing called COVID hit. And that's when we all found out about this. And the interesting thing, and this is why we put it up this way, and it really does relate to the talk you're going to hear from Shaheen as well, is that there were two problems. The first one was the machines were giving out false positives for people with darker skin. So this, in America, the research was around Asian Americans and Black Americans, and so if you looked at their skin, they were not getting, when they went to hospital and said, you can't breathe, they were being told that actually they were fine to go home. They were done, and they were done. What they then found, though, was if they pushed it, that Asian Americans were more likely to get into intensive care. Okay. So that was a cultural issue. That wasn't a machine issue. So when we think about inclusive design and those three dimensions that we spoke about before, we're actually talking about both sides. It's not just what you design, it's also your culture, your practices, your policies, and your mindset that you need to think about. And so three small things to think about when you're redesigning or recreating. I've got a picture there. This is one of my favourite parks. It's in Randwick. And the thing about parks that's great is that parks work for so many different people at so many different times in their lives, right? And we use them so differently. So they work for little kids, they work for grandparents who are walking through those playgrounds. They work for teenagers. That was this picture here in the middle of the night, and you can see the legs of one young man there who was going up there with his girlfriend. So they work in different ways, and not everyone uses their playground the same way. So in an inclusive playground, we all use it differently. And the inclusive playground movement in Australia, where the universal design principles are too complicated, no one follows them. So how do we do this? And I came up with these three statements. I use them all the time. Can I get them? So you can have the best playground in the world. But if someone can't get into a bus to get there, or they have no transport, or they don't know the playground exists, they can't use it. When they get there, this is the part we tend to focus on. Can they actually use the equipment? Can they use it? And the last one, which we sometimes forget, is can I stay there? Do I feel comfortable here? Does this feel like it's made for me? Do I feel like I'm just like everyone else? And do I want to be in this space? You can use these for everything from recruitment practices, to creating new products, to policy design, to leading your team. But they are a way to think about how this might work for you as well. And when we think about this, we think about what it means. I think we were talking before, and the reason I'm passionate about this, I think, is that sometimes we think this is something that's a nice to have. But all of us may well someday be in a situation where it's our situation. And when we think about what a nice to have is and a must have is, we don't sit there going, we build these great new homes out west, and they're great for new people to come and live in, and they're really cheap and affordable. And you go to your house, and imagine you go there, and it's got this great garden, and it's got these fantastic bay windows, and there's no door. And they go, well, we couldn't afford the doors, they were a bit expensive, but it's okay, you can just walk through the window. It's just there, you can just go through. We don't do that, but we do that every day. We do that all the time. So let's start building doors for people who need them. And let's start having the conversation that doesn't say, is this really necessary? But how can we do this? Because when we include people, we innovate for all of us, and we create a better world for all of us as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Manisha. Cool. All right. So I'm going to deal with the light and breezy topic of can we actually do inclusive design for everybody? My name is Shaheen. I should probably talk about this. So I am a learning designer with a focus on inclusion. So I sit at the intersection of design, learning, and inclusion. I tie that up all neatly in a bow through Colleague Consulting, which is the business I run. All right. So I think Manisha gave some really great examples on inclusive design when we're designing for everyone. So, you know, if you're designing for the fringes, it helps everybody in the world. You make curb cuts for people in wheelchairs, people in prams use it. I broke my foot 6 months ago and I used the curb cuts because I was on crutches. So it works for everybody. But what I want to argue is, what I want to present the point about is that you're often not designing for the whole world. You are designing for a certain section. And so when people ask me, but you can't really be inclusive for everybody, who are you designing for? And if we follow the design thinking process, the first thing that you would do is you think about your audience. You think about the outcomes they want. And so then that makes it really easy. And that's probably the point that we miss, is who is our audience that we're working towards and working for. And so here's an example of your regular sign-up form. Nothing out of the world about this. There's a register on the top. There's a first name, a last name, an email, a password, confirm password, and then you register. I cannot fill out this form because I don't have a last name. I come from a culture where my mom didn't change her name after the wedding. Go mom. And so all my siblings and I have a different last name. We didn't take our dad's name. There is no family name. We have 2 given names. And so when I moved to Australia, the Australian bureaucracy freaked out because I would walk up to people and be like, I don't have a last name. And so by default, what everybody did is they put my full name, which is Hajira Shaheen, in the last name. And then depending on who was sitting at the desk, I'd have a different first name. And so this is the funny part of the story. According to my passport, my first name is XXX. According to the RTA, or the Road and Transport, my first name and last name, they were probably feeling a bit tired that day. They copy-pasted it, so it's Hajira Shaheen, Hajira Shaheen. My favorite is Medicare. My first name is only name. My last name is Hajira Shaheen. So literally all of the correspondence I get from Medicare says, hi, only name? Says that.
Wow.
Now, the reason I say that is because for most of the people in the room, this works, and that's okay. But it only works for part of the world. And if you're designing a website and it's global, maybe we should think about having just one field that says full name, which a lot of people have started to do. And then as a bonus, if you want to be really cool, you can have a subline there that maybe says, what would you like to be addressed as? And so I can say my full name is Hajira Shaheen, I want to be addressed as Shaheen, and so then I get an email that says, hi Shaheen, which would be appropriate. And so when I think about the scaffolding, which will probably be the next 10 minutes or so of what I talk, I work a lot in the D&I, inclusive design space, and it's the scaffolding that I generally think about is thinking about marginalization and power structures. So Manisha talked about this. It is about the marginalization and where the power sits in the people that you're designing this for. So there could be a white man in the room, but maybe they're an intern. And maybe the other people in the room are the board and the CEO, and they feel disempowered. So there is no real definition of who holds power. That changes depending on the context. So being aware of where the power sits in the room is a really great first thing to do. The second great thing to do is to think about your own identity and privilege. Now, I could talk to you for 3 hours just about identity. It's one of my favorite things. But the reason I point that out is because when you walk into a room, you walk in with a certain identity. And that transfers into the lens that you use when you design stuff. So when I walk in today, I'm a designer. I'm a learning professional and part of the lived experience that I have. When I walk into my gym or my community center, I hold a different identity. I'm not going to be a designer there. Then I'm a part of the community. I'm a person who wants to be healthy. And that identity that all of us change depending on the context we are in, that's really important because that's the lens we use when we design for other people. So just being aware of that is a really good thing. And then we talked about some of these things using participatory and inclusive co-design methodologies. And again, that changes, that is contextual. So if you're in a room with people who are trying to make a decision, maybe they can use an anonymous way of voting. Maybe you give them dots and people walk up and put the dots and nobody knows. And the power structures, therefore, are equalized in a way. One of the things that I like to use to think, and I know we're talking about inclusive, and this is terrible for inclusion, so I will read this out. This is what we call the wheel of privilege. The way it works is the closer you are to the center, the more privileged you are. And the aspects that go around that form part of the privilege are gender, skin color, sexuality, citizenship, wealth, ability, appearance, religion, language, housing, formal education, body size, mental health, neurodiversity. There's a few because there's a few of those things that we didn't think about. Body size. How many of us feel not confident because we feel that we're not the right body size? How many of us feel that how many of us feel that we're not good looking enough and therefore have low confidence? Citizenship. What is the power structure between somebody who's a citizen versus a tourist or a migrant or a PR or a Kiwi resident? They all have different levels of power. And so this is a good way of starting to think about what's the lived experience of people that they might bring. And therefore, if you are facilitating or designing for somebody, facilitating a workshop or designing a product or a service, what might be some things that we need to think about? Another interesting one that we don't think about often is how many are unhoused. That's a rising problem. There are some really people with great education, great background, one mistake, one medical bill away from being unhoused. How are we designing for them? What views of them are we taking into consideration? And what's the lens we have, and what's the privilege that we bring into the room? Because some of these things we don't even know what that feels like. And I remember 3 years ago, I joined an organization that does a lot of work in disability. And I have no lived experience in disability. None of my family has, none of my friends do. And so when I walked in there, it took me a good 6 to 12 months to unlearn everything I knew about disability and learn what I really should be. And it's true, but I had quite an ableist way of thinking because that was not my lived experience. And so the more we have conversations with people, the more we talk to other people, the more we read, the more we listen to podcasts, the better we have an understanding of a glimpse into somebody else's world. So if we can just think about what privilege we are bringing into the room, can I, as somebody who has no experience of living on the streets, walk into a workshop and think I can design for them? And to Manisha's point, it really is about understanding who are you designing for, but also who's actually doing the design. I can stand there as a facilitator and get the best ideas, but I shouldn't be the one designing it because I have no idea what that life looks like. So for me, inclusion is a mindset and a methodology. And having just a mindset is great. It's a great place to start, but we need to marry that with methodologies. It's thinking about the science and the art. It's thinking about what can we actually do to make sure we're hearing all of the right voices that need to be in that space. I heard one of my friends said this, and I'm going to steal it. They said, empathy is not about walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. It is about putting the power back in the hands of the room. And that's what I always think about when I do any sort of participatory facilitation. It's about how can I sit in a corner, make myself invisible, and guide the process so it's the others in the room who are making the decision. And all I'm doing is taking notes and creating the space where people are able to talk. And therefore, what are some scientific methodologies? And that's a whole different Sydney thinking meetup. What are the methodologies that you can use to actually ensure that you're matching up your mindset with the work that's happening? And so I'll leave you with one framework. This is the one for the designers in the room. So if anybody knows the Richard Buchanan's 4 Orders of Design, show of hands. A couple. Okay, so the way the 4 Orders of Design work is we think of design as nested eggs, and we start with the basics. So topography, colors, symbols. This is what would generally sit in the accessibility realm. So it's all of the, the contrast colors, screen readers. How do we design things like that? Then we move up to products. It's the actual product, the tangible. If I'm designing this mic, what is it going to look like? What's the stem like? How big is the mic? Where is it sitting? That's the product, second order of design. The third order of design is the interactions. It's how is the human interacting with this mic? Do people want to hold it? Do people want to keep it in one place? Do I hold it here? Do I put it on? What am I doing with it? What's the interaction with the product itself? And then the fourth order of design is the design of systems. It's the organization, the learning journeys for people. It's the system-wide design. So as you can see, they all kind of level up from the first order to the fourth order. When we do work at Atlassian, we look at this framework because in a way it's holistic and gives us an idea of all the range of inclusion that can be done at every level. And then we ask a series of questions. So this is just an example of 3 questions that we might ask at the service design or the interaction design level. What's your pre-game? If you're inviting people to an event or a workshop or a meeting, have you sent out the invite with the detailed agenda? Do people know if there's going to be interaction that's needed? Do people know if there's any questions that will be asked of them? Is there going to be a break? Should I bring my lunch? There's questions people have. Have you answered any of that? And we know, and Maz might come to this a bit later, if you're designing and if there's in your group of people you're designing for, if there is neurodiversity, people want to know things. They don't like surprises. And so just telling people will be really useful in what I call your pre-game or your invitation. It's a really cool thing I used to do at higher up based on feedback that I got, was when I would send out a workshop, I would have 1 to 5, what's the interaction level that will be needed in this workshop? Because I was leading the L&D team. Some of them were training, so you could come up, literally show up in your OD and sit back with your cameras. I didn't mind because they were getting trained and I was talking. Interaction level 1. And then there were workshops that I was facilitating that we really wanted. We were running a retro, for instance, and I needed participation. So participation level 5. So people knew what to turn up as, what to do. So thinking about your pre-game and how to let people know what to decide is one way of doing that. Thinking if you're providing options. Again, options are good for everybody. If you want to speak up, raise your hand, raise your virtual hand, type in chat, do what you want. As a facilitator, it's my job to put all of that together. That's my job. You don't have to worry about, oh, you have to do it this way, and that's the only way I'll listen to you. That's not impulsive. So what are the options that I give to people? How are you evaluating? Are you evaluating it through a written form? What if somebody doesn't like writing? What if somebody's dyslexic? What are the other forms of evaluating this? Can you get them to complete a task? Can you get them to draw an image? Can you get them to choose a smiley? Like, what are the different ways, again, of evaluating that are not textual? So that's a really simple way of thinking through sort of, again, as you will see, this framework does not include you have to do this, because I don't know who you're designing for. This is just a series of coaching questions to ask ourselves to look at a program or a system or a product and be like, is this inclusive enough or not? And now I will hand it over to Max. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'm going to take that. That's a really long time for us all to sit. Thank you, Manisha and Shaheen. And I'm also really conscious I am the human that is standing behind you and your beer. So with that in mind, it's just like never a good space to be in. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to do what you need to do. It might be a turn and share, discuss something that you've heard, because it's been a lot that has been, like my brain is buzzing right now. Turn and share, stand up, stretch, close your eyes, meditate, hum, chant, sing to the gods. I don't really mind. 30 seconds, go.
Can we trade notes? So good, so engaging.
All right, 10 seconds.
That clock doesn't work.
Now this is an interesting addition to tonight. All right, 30 seconds is up. See, now I can see the smart humans who've already got themselves a drink. Awesome. Continue on, do your thing. I'm just going to start talking. What's interesting to me is I sat in that seat for the last half an hour or so knowing that there's a clock up there, freaking out internally because I don't do time. Like when I say I don't do time, I do not see time at all. I'm completely time blind. Now one would think that if that was the case, that having a clock would be awesome. Anxiety provoking. So here's the irony. If you get a chance to come check it out, that thing doesn't work. We're on 000 right now. So I'm going to ask an ally in the first two seats, does somebody feel like time is their thing and they can help me keep on track, because I want to keep this under 10 minutes. Anybody, third, fourth row, give me a, up the back there. Thank you, my friend. If you could raise your hand at like 8 minutes, 7 minutes, yeah, I reckon I could do it. Just to give me a, that would be amazing. Thanks. Hi, I'm Maz. I can't see time.
Hey Maz,
also,
stay off the grey.
Oh, thank you. Can't see space either. I'm also ADHD, combined type, as a funky part of my way of being in the world, which means I'm both inattentive and hyperactive. Now, the interesting story about time, and actually before I get that, I did try and describe this to a colleague the other day, and they were like, what do you mean you don't see time? I was like, what do you mean you do see time? Like, what's that like? I can't describe to you what that's like to not see time. And I'll bet you can't describe to me what it's like if you can see time. But how weird is it? And so if you find yourself catching yourself listening to this person, Maz up the front, describing this weird concept, that's okay. I would rather that you ask me questions and we have these uncomfortable conversations. Because if I was up here standing with one leg and I had my prosthetic limb in the front row and I was comfortable being on one leg, but when I wanted to move around, I just asked if somebody in the front row could please pass me my prosthetic. I'm not sure that anybody would raise an eyebrow or ask the question. And this is the challenge when it comes to inclusive design for neurominorities. Because what we're dealing with in terms of the struggles, and I actually speak a lot to strengths, my work is in peak performance for neurominority groups, but when it comes to our struggles, and they really impact our life in so many ways, we're talking about invisible differences and invisible disabilities that even those of us as neurodivergent people can't always wrap our heads around. That was the case for me. So before my diagnosis, which was only 4 years ago, that's a whole story within itself in terms of inclusive design and our lack of such in the medical system, but we won't go there tonight. I found myself getting ready for an event like this one that was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so smart Maz move, had booked myself a hotel just 10 minutes away from the event venue. I was in the hotel 10 o'clock in the morning with a whole stack of work I needed to get done, right? At 10 o'clock in the morning, having organised my outfit, having done the checklist, having done all the things that you do when you don't realise you're actually ADHD, so you're overcompensating, I found myself doing these ones. In the hotel room, checking the clock. It's 10:05. Wow, that was a really long 5 minutes, wasn't it? I guess that's what people do when they see time. They spend 5 minutes walking in their pyjamas, not getting anything done, not being able to brush their teeth, not being able to make a phone call or do that thing that I said I was going to do, because all I could think about was how on earth I was going to manage to get to that event at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was 10 minutes, I think, down the road, checked the Google Maps, checked that, yeah, definitely 10 minutes, couldn't do a thing. And it struck me that maybe not everybody lived this way. But something's going on here, Maz. So then I did some Googling, as you do when you're ADHD and you don't realise, you do a rabbit hole deep dive and went, ADHD could be the answer. 4 doctors later, because the first 3 told me I couldn't possibly have ADHD, because I forgot to mention I'm a clinical psychologist, and apparently those 2 things don't go together. You can't finish a master's program and have ADHD. So when I talk about inclusive design, and I look at this through the lens of inclusive work-life design, so how can we create work-life design systems where we're recognising our struggles and compensating for those? Because this is not about not taking accountability. In fact, as neurodivergent people, we tend to overcompensate for a lot of the things that we need to do differently in a world that's... Thank you for turning those lights off. Wow, I was wearing my sunnies up until now. This is awesome. This light's getting heaps better. It's not about not taking accountability. It's about recognising what our strengths and our struggles are and showing up in a world that's just not built for our brains. So with all that in mind, you might be surprised to hear that actually for me, the label of ADHD was incredibly helpful, because it actually helped me to ditch a whole bunch of labels that others had given to me and that I'd given to myself. She must be lazy. She's just a little bit of a scatterbrain. Oh, she's blonde, you know, that old chestnut. Oh, she's had kids. Being a mum's so stressful, isn't it? Like, don't you just find that like you just leave your keys everywhere? Yeah, I do actually. And that happened to me before I had kids as well. So I got to ditch some of the labels that had otherwise been assigned to me that weren't mine really to ever hold. And some of those labels came with a great amount of shame attached to them. Because as a neurodivergent person, I'm very acutely aware of my differences. But now that I know that they sit within my brain biology and a really sensitive nervous system that has incredible strengths, by the way, that can connect with people in a room, because I can note and clock where the smile is coming from before I've even seen it. So incredible strengths. But now I know that actually there are just some parts about me and my body and my brain that kind of out of my control, and I have to learn to love and accept in a radical new way. So that's a lot of the work that I do today. So speaking to that, there's a 3-part framework. How are we going for time?
7 minutes.
Left, or I'm hitting 7
3
minutes?
minutes left.
Done, because I've got 3 points I won't leave you with tonight. So 1 for each. Awareness. There's a massive gap, right? In the tech sector, 53% of professionals identify as neurodivergent. You ask their employers, they believe that number of representation to be 3%. Now, why is this a problem? Well, because if you don't know the brains in your business, guess what? You ain't setting them up for success. You don't know what their vulnerabilities are, and you don't know what their potential is. And I'll bet your bottom bippy that it's definitely being underperformed at right now. So once you understand that actually within the neurodivergent profile, again, not a great inclusive slide, just email me and I'll send it to you. But these are all the strengths that come with our neurodivergent profiles. And once we can remove, yes, Stokesy! Once we can remove some of these social barriers that get in our way of us being at our best and work together actually, then we can really thrive as a community. And so I believe that when it comes to understanding that piece, the acceptance comes in. Okay, there are some things that we can't control, right? I can't control that I was born with a brain that can't see time. But you know what? I can absolutely self-advocate, and I can reach out for a community that can help me do that. I can create a work-life design that works for me, and I can develop that new form of radical self-acceptance and compassion that comes in the process. And then what is in our control is that collectively we can take a shared responsibility. We can create cultures of safety that aren't just good for our neurodivergent community, but they're good for everybody. We can have safe environments. We can take note of our lights, of our plants in the corner, the sounds around us, the way we set our systems up, of recognizing that sometimes flexibility is not an option. It's actually a necessity if we want to get our job done. The 3 dimensions of safety, very quickly, I need to be able to see people like me in my organization or in the world around me, right? So if I can't see that, I'm probably not going to share with you what's going on for me. Secondly, even if I can see them, I need to have a place to belong. So this is the perceived inclusion piece. So where do people like me kind of hang out and do our thing? You know, is that publicly stated and shared, and is it rippled across all lines of the community, or the school, or the family, or the workplace that I'm in? And then thirdly, that's where the policies and the procedures come in. That's the accountability piece. 9 times out of 10, I start working with an organisation, guess where they want to start? Number 3. Ain't no good having something on your piece of paper, love, if you ain't going to do it. It's actually one of the worst things that you can do for your community. So have a think about layers 1 and 2. And the third step I will say is action. No, I'm not going to give you a list of environmental considerations. I'm not going to tell you the incredible number of formal and informal adjustments you can make in your workplace. And I'll tell you why. Because if you've met one neurodivergent person, you have met one neurodivergent person. So these are all really important frameworks like appreciative inquiry that ask us to ask what is already working well and how can we close the gap, how can we do things differently. But the call to action that I have for you is to develop some really good skills when it comes to asking curious, compassionate questions. Yes, please rip out those phones and take a photo because that's what it's for. Share these questions. And you'll notice that nowhere in that does it say, what conditions as an ADHDer at work help you perform at your best? Disclosure is lovely, but it's not necessary. If we can all learn to connect with one another with curiosity and compassion and genuine kindness and a desire to help the other person to live to their best, then we've got the ingredients for inclusive design. I'm Maz. I'm a proud ADHD and mum to 2 twice exceptional teens. I'm watching my clock, man, and I'm really hoping tonight I'm on time. Yeah, baby! And maybe slightly sometimes a recovering overachiever. Thanks for having us. Tonight's been amazing.
A huge thanks to the 3 of you, and you're not off duty yet.
Oh.
Because I think we're still going to get a few questions in.
Oh, we're going to.
You up for that?
I'm up for that.
Awesome. Come on up. Has everyone got questions? That was very half-hearted. As long
I
as
was going to say, if you want to and need to go, I personally will not be offended. It's late.
the offence level might
The
vary.
offence level is not with me. It's a cup of tea. It's a cup of tea. Bedtime, isn't it?
You sound like an old man.
And do turn into a pumpkin.
I think that should all work. Awesome, so I'll start here. First of all, another big thanks to Manisha, Shaheen and Erez. I really enjoyed that, and I love the way that it cascaded as well. So perfectly set the scene, thinking and talking about power dynamics, which we don't do enough, and then getting very specific as well. So love that. something we didn't deep dive on.
It's designed.
It was, and it was beautifully designed.
Co-designed.
It was co-designed. Very intentional, very mindful. So, I mean, it's 3 weeks old now, it's so passé. So the first thing, just while I get set up, is you hinted at it, but how do you spend your days? What do you actually get up to, each of you?
Oh wow. That's
Without the full-blown bio,
Okay.
but what would you like to share in terms of how you spend your days?
That's almost as bad as a question of what do you do. So I mindfully, eclectically communicate science across a multitude of platforms. Professionally, I'm a clinical psychologist, but the majority of my work is in science communications. So coaching, executive coaching for neurodivergent individuals, consulting into organisations, designing inclusive workplace programs, podcasting, writing, all of it.
It's a funny question.
Was that working?
Yeah, I think it's a funny question when you say what do you do in your day, because I like filling my day up. But I started the Inclusive Design Collective 6 weeks ago, so we're very new. And we are a group of specialists in inclusive design with lots of different lived experiences as well. And the work we've been doing already has been in the areas of inclusive research, as well as training, education, leadership work, facilitation, and basically I'm happy to do whatever anyone asks me to do, as are my crew, as long as they meet 3 key things. Number one, it has to have inclusion framework somewhere in it. It has to be with people we love. It has to make an impact. And we have to have the same values. And as long as those 4 things work, then we're your people.
And for clarification, that was awesome. For clarification, how you spend your days doesn't just mean work.
No.
So you can fill that however you'd like.
Well, there's also the fiction books the fiction I'm writing, and I've just started to set up new course on sensory awareness. So I start the first practice class this Sunday. If anyone is interested, come and speak to me about it.
Yeah, that's what my answer was. Like, I start with a brunch. So yeah, I
Late starter.
yeah. The second meal of the day. Yeah, so work-wise, I do inclusive design. Like, that's really my thing. At the moment, I'm contracting with Cancer Council part-time, so facilitating anti-smoking trainings and designing workshops around that. Doing some inclusive education project work through Macquarie University, and then working through my business on probably the weekends and other things. So work-wise, that's kind of what's happening. I do love a good walk. I'm very much into bushwalking and paddling and all of the beauty that Sydney offers, doing long brunches, catching up with friends. It was my birthday yesterday, so lots of cake. I did not require an applause. Thank you.
You survived another year. Yes.
Baking, cooking, hanging out with my beautiful nieces. Yeah, just an easy life.
Awesome. Nice eclectic way of spending your time, which is fun. Then you're living life.
That's the whole point of life, isn't it?
That's what I think.
Yeah.
So who's got questions? Who's been straight up? And if you yell it out, I'll do my best to paraphrase so everyone can hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to first say I really enjoyed the presentation. I really like the intersectionality and empathy that really goes into these stories and information. So that was really kudos to you. Now, my question is that from what I've understood with these presentations and these anecdotes, is that what stops research from happening and getting a better understanding of disadvantaged communities is that sometimes funding isn't allocated or the right funding isn't allocated. What is usually the best effective methods in assuring that you get the right funding to facilitate these communities and these demographics?
I'll do a quick recap. So thanks for everything. That was the first part of the comment. And then funding for research, education, and how to get it in the right place at the right time, and navigating the system to make that happen. Is that okay as a paraphrase?
Yeah, that's the most effective ways to do it.
Most effective way to make that happen.
Yeah, make that happen.
Okay. So there's a couple of things.
I think you're second.
Yeah, the Centre for Inclusive Design has, where some of the stats came from, have a white paper online called The Benefits of Designing for Everyone. That has a lot of numbers in it. So if you're working in an organisation that needs lots of numbers, that's a good place to get some of those numbers from. The other thing that we've been thinking about a lot though is when you look at market research and the money that we spend, we did some work with two companies that are happy for me to name them, Australia Post and the ATO. And what they did was they did their mainstream research and then we did the inclusive design piece. Now, the inclusive design piece cost more per user than the mainstream research did, but we needed less users because each user was a maverick on the edge, right? So our research cost 1/10 of what the mainstream research did, and it found all of the same spots as the mainstream research did, plus extra spots and a heat map of priorities. Okay? So when we say that it costs more if it's an add-on. But actually, if they did less of the mainstream research, it wouldn't cost more. So sometimes it's about reframing what we think is important in order to get what we need.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah,
Are you
totally.
saying that your inclusive wider pool of people found the same stuff as
The mainstream.
the mainstream?
Yeah, because if you think about it, like Maz has just talked about having ADHD, she still wants to buy Vegemite. Yeah, so she still has the same wants and needs as the mainstream market does. It's just that her experiences are more acute, so you get better research, deeper research, and bigger research. If you're looking at qual, quant is different.
So what you're saying is if you lead with inclusive pool first, you're playing the same stuff anyway, you can
That's
save
right.
money again?
That's exactly right. What I would say, and this is particularly, I used to say, you just go to the edge, forget the middle. But what I would now say is the middle, what it gives you is it gives you exploitation, the biggest number. Right? What the edge gives you is your insights and your innovation.
And as a follow-up, just I do want to challenge also this idea that there is not enough research. I think there's a lot of research that does happen. Unfortunately, the problem is the research is explained in academic terms, and so it doesn't move into practice. And so I'm a nerd. In my free time, I used to read psychology journals. That's a nerd I am. And so I read research.
That's why we're friends.
That's why we're friends. But it doesn't get used in practice. And so I think there's that link that's broken because people in academia think people in business are just making money, and people in business think academics are boring and don't know what they're doing. And so that link is broken, and what we need more of is practitioners who are also academics.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on that. I agree with that, and I'd add that there needs to be more funding for research, and it's not there right now. So you're really astutely picking that up, particularly when it comes to, I spoke at the top of my presentation about my experience, even with all the knowledge that I have as a clinician, to miss my own parts of myself blew my mind. Until then I went to the research to go, okay, well, what's going on with the twice exceptional community in particular, which is you've got giftedness plus neurodevelopmental difference, but then for ADHD and women, we are completely missing from all of the data. So our assessment protocol, our treatment protocol, because we've still lived in a world where we have to fix neurodevelopmental differences, is wrapped around particular samples that tend to be men and tend to be of particular cultural backgrounds. So we've got very, very limited understanding of brain-based differences. I'm just speaking for my community. So advocating for funding to go in that direction is awesome. And I would also argue that I think we're going to move into a different era, talking of design and research, around what constitutes good research. And I'm seeing a lot of really fantastic grassroots research coming out where educated people are seeing their privilege as a responsibility to actually get in there and measure what we're doing and to communicate that, which is why I'm really passionate about science communication. So I think it's this and.
I think the first hand I saw was back left. Yep.
How do you find the middle or edge band for research?
How do do you find the edge?
How do you find the middle and the edge, Ben?
If they're ADHD, it's just ask them, they'll come running.
So the way we do it is the middle. So if you think of something that you normally work on, who do you normally think, who's the mainstream that you're designing for? Okay, so that's how you find the middle. And the edge, often what we do is say, who aren't you designing for? Who's missing out? Or who could this product serve that's not? I'm using product as a general term. And I'd often go because of age, race, gender, ability. You can use the privilege wheel if you like, and go, who aren't we servicing? And it's pretty, you'll find them quite quickly. What you then want to do is look at the intersectional piece around that. So it's no use you, looking at a community that is not interested in your product or would never be interested in your product. So you don't want to research with a 10-year-old if you're selling alcohol, right? So in the same vein, you look for the people that are the right people, but are also people who are excluded. Does that answer your question?
How do you actually get them to come to you?
Yeah.
So market research?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So like normally we use something like Askable or something like that where
Yeah.
you're doing those dealer questions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you get.
No, Askable's not good for, yeah. And the problem with Askable is they actually don't check who they're getting. So there are a range of different ways you can get those people. I have a database of 400 people. And then there's different databases you can access depending on groups that you're looking for. So for instance, if you're looking for people with disability, depending on what you're looking for, the NDIS has a list that they are happy to work with. There's some really great Indigenous lists now that you can use as well. The difference is that what is always advocated is you pay the person, okay? And you pay them a fair amount, like it's $50 an hour is the standard. And the recruitment cost to find the person is probably about $350 to $450 rather than your Askable rate. So you just have to budget in a little bit more in terms of trying to find them. So it probably takes about 2 weeks rather than 1 day.
And Manisha's email is on that slide. So that might be a nice, easy action.
Universities also are good recruitment places, and lots of universities have inclusion centres. So that might be it.
And go spend time in the communities that you're wanting to get to understand and know. So prior to doing, well, in addition to doing my neurodiversity work, I run a social enterprise called the Possify Group. We design products to be our own services to be able to scale positive psychology and career development for youth. So we've spent a lot of time in marginalised youth communities asking questions and inviting kids to co-design with us, getting qualitative data, quantitative data, and then taking our design back and saying, what's working well and what do we need to improve here? So don't be afraid to reach out to communities, because especially communities that feel like they're underrepresented, if they get that you're genuinely invested in wanting to help them solve a problem that's there, they're going to be your best friends in the space of a couple of minutes. You just got to decide how much time you want to dedicate.
And actually, just on that, something that Shaheen said as well is who's actually doing the research. So my passion project is looking at the use of AI for Aboriginal deaf people who speak Aboriginal Sign Languages in remote Australia, right? So it's not a group that I can look at Askable for and get access to. However, the person who leads that project is a woman I found on a podcast, and she's Aboriginal and she happens to also be deaf, and she speaks all 15 languages. And so she actually is she's the lead of the project, and she's also the head of the steering group. Like, she runs our project for us, and she's our elder on the project. So she will go out before we do any research to the community. She does all the cultural stuff. She then comes back and tells us what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do in that community to meet the goals of the project. And then we go out so that it's not extractive. And so that's another way. So you can actually just find the people, or you can find the people who know the people.
So definitely a different approach and much more deeply engaging as opposed to surface level. Yeah. And nothing about me without me again as a principle.
Yeah, that's all.
Any more?
Max.
Yes.
I'm going to put you both up with this one. So also a PhD bounce around like Eveready Bunny. But the question I've got for you, personally, I find the design community probably the most empowered in the process to design for inclusivity. So how does the design community actually become advocates for inclusivity?
So what's the role of allyship? Is that part of the question? Yeah.
And specifically for the design community, is that the framing?
Yeah, because if you look at design, they're really the ones that are designing the systems, it could be a website, it could be all sorts of things. So they've got a particular role, but how do they become advocates for inclusivity as part of that process? You touched on it, the health system.
I feel like this is a leading question. Do you want to give us the answer? I'm sitting in the hot seat.
I want to hear your views on it. Personally, I believe the design community has a particular strength that they may not even realise at this point. So if you look at an example, say somebody with epilepsy is going into a hospital. It's a horrendous experience after they've had a seizure. You know, the light especially, and the noise, because they're hyper tuned into light and noise. Somebody that was designing that actual system could actually re-engineer it for someone, you know, could just be neurodivergent alert. So they take them into a quieter space, you know, the lights are dim, etc. You know, so that's just one example. But it's like, how does the design community be, I guess, more overt or assertive when it comes to designing inclusivity as part of the systems which they're designing?
I can't paraphrase that one, so you want to paraphrase the question you want to answer, and I'll leave it to you.
I think how do designers become good allies? I think there's two sides to this. The first side of it is exactly what Shaheen said with the privilege wheel, I think. So where I think the challenge I have for all of us as designers is we all are very privileged. We have jobs where we can create things in ways that other people can't create or aren't empowered to create things. So if designers stopped being designers and became facilitators and agents of change, then we would see more nothing about us without us, right? So that would be a way that designers could actually practice what they were preaching. The other side is actually just by changing who's in the middle. The third thing I would say is that at the moment the market's really shit, and it's pretty tough for designers as well. And in fact, the power sometimes doesn't sit with the designers, it actually sits with the business development people or with the tech teams. So I think it's also about designers understanding that they have some role in this, but maybe be kind to yourselves.
Yeah, and I'd add to that in terms of, because the allyship piece in general is really interesting in the community at the moment. I've seen a shift from the neurodivergent community saying nothing about us without us, and that means you don't get to speak on my behalf. And then the shift is starting to happen of like, oh, I'm actually really fatiguing about talking about all this stuff that's kind of a little bit triggering. Can you come and help me out here? And so where I think we're moving now is like, how do we have open, curious conversations that are kind with one another and swap the baton over? But to your point about, you know, resources are limited, but guess what's not limited? It's our capacity to share stories. And so you're all in this room tonight, and you all have then your own spheres of influence that you have the potential and the power to press send on a social media post, or to send an email, or to send a text to somebody that you've learned something new and you want to share that insight. So using the power of community, regardless of your background, but design, for sure designers have got that power of privilege to really make incredible change. But there are small acts of impact that we can all make that can really make a difference, and those little mini moments of trust, I think, as an ally, build up over time.
The be kind.
Yeah, like just be a good human. I mean,
yeah.
Can we have a tagline about that? Hashtag.
I'll chuck in one of my questions quickly, and we probably should start wrapping up. The work that all of you are doing is really important and impactful, and it's also involves giving a lot of yourself in that process. So I'm curious how you look after your own well-being while you're doing that work, in any way that you're willing to share.
Thank you. I think it starts with boundaries. So setting really good boundaries, making sure I'm aware of when there is too much of me in something and pull back. So knowing what my triggers are, what's too much, and when I can pull back. It's a good thing I am a learning person, so I kind of teach other people this, and then I try and apply that to myself. So knowing what my tipping point is and pulling myself back, and that's boundaries is a big one. But I am also very conscious of the fact that I do have a voice, and that's a privilege. And I try and use that that for me is the purpose for me and for Pali to exist. And if I'm not going to use my voice, there's lots of other people who I know who don't have that. So there's the drive, there's the boundaries, and then there's multi-day hikes, which is my way of getting back to myself, just like no human beings and me and walking and other travelers on the track with me.
So that's why I'm starting to teach my course, record the course, because I need to get out of my head sometimes and back into my body, and if I teach something, I'll do it more. When I had a team, it was great, because what we had a couple of rules around this. So if something was too personal for me, I was finding after doing a lot of work that anything to do, I was okay talking about my disability, but I started to not be okay talking about race. And every time I did it, I found myself personalising things too much. So one of my colleagues who happened to be Australian but white Australian, he would take those. So we'd swap roles, so that different people would do different work. So just actually, I think the biggest thing for me is just watching how things impact on me, trying to depersonalise what's impacting on me, or noticing it, so that I can actually just be as nimble as I need to be in a situation, and meeting people where they are. If I'm not feeling great, then I don't work. My job is not to convince people of what they should do. That's not my job. My job is actually to work with people who want to make change and help them to make change. So I'm looking for innovators and instigators. I'm not looking for the laggards, because that work's somebody else's work, and it's too hard from where I'm sitting. So that's the way I try to think about it. But I get my energy from being with people. So in fact, the biggest gift I have is that when I'm working with a community in the middle of nowhere, I'm actually reconciling with being in this country. I'm reconciling with myself, and I'm actually learning so much in such a lovely way that I could never learn out of a book or a TV show. So if it didn't give me energy, I don't think I'd do it.
Anything you want to say about your somatic practice and what's coming up?
So basically, I've just come back from doing the trainer 2 days ago, which is why this is in my mind. But it's actually a practice. They teach it to children in schools in an intentional community I go to, and basically it's about connecting your physical self, your subtle self, your emotional self, and your mental self, and being able to understand those differences. And when we talk about being present, etc., often we think about that as meditating. I can't meditate for shit. I can't get out of my mind. However, it's kinesthetic, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I can change my state completely. And it's fun because it's been built for kids. So that's the reason I started practicing this, and I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome.
You'd hope, given I teach peak performance, sustained performance for professionals, that I've got my own protocol down pat. It's changing though, all the time. So I would say that my basics really haven't changed, but I've probably layered on top. So, all the stuff, more hyperactive style. So I tend to go towards the HIIT training, the hiking, to get energy out. But I've learned to understand and getting more comfortable with my unique energy flows. So I've learned to accept that the way that my brain, my body works is that I will have a sprint, and I will get a lot done, and I'll have a lot of energy, and I know I can time things around that sprint, and then I know I need a recovery. And that recovery I've learned to actually really honour, and to see it as a season of rest and creativity, and to really when I talk about work-life design, it's understanding and recognising that it will change, but that I need to honour my biology and respond to that. So one of the just recent changes, I talk a lot about self-compassion, and when we think about self-compassion, people often go to that nurturing kindness. I'm going to make myself a cup of tea, I'm going to have a bath, I'm going to do all those things. That is true, and something that I'm practicing is the art of fierce self-compassion, which is around learning how to say no. So especially for neurodivergent people, and women in particular, we are such big people pleasers. I will say yes because we've got the shiny light syndrome and we've got that impulsivity in our personality and everything's really exciting. But if we haven't got then the strategies and the support networks to be able to pace ourselves, that's when we're at risk of burnout. So I'm practicing a lot more fierce self-compassion and naming what I need and asking others to help. That's new for me. Did you say high five?
Yeah, that's massive.
I know, it shouldn't be massive, right? Asking for help, but it is.
And I love how software and the experimentation to work out your own practices and how they change over time as well. One last question.
So you said lots of really cool things. I've got too many questions. I hope you come to the pub. But you said a really cool thing about designing inside systems and acknowledging that sometimes you're going to clash against it. Right? You have to acknowledge it. What are the most common friction points or challenges that you found when working with existing systems that have been there for decades?
Give us an example. Like, are you
Changing
talking about
culture
at
inside a
schools or in a company? Okay. So a really interesting system.
So I'll just repeat quickly, changing culture within a company was the focal point.
So if we think about the system of companies in Australia, hierarchical. Okay, so companies are command and control. We've been told that the way to get ahead in a company is by being a great speaker, which has got nothing to do with anything really, but like from school, you know, Johnny is great at history, but he doesn't speak up enough in class. That's not about history. That's actually about how we behave in the workplace. So these are they're biases that are baked into the system that we don't quite realise are there. Now, when you hit that against something like hybrid workplaces, we run into trouble. When we look at performance plans, right? So if you go, how do we judge that someone's, so Shaheen is high performing and Maz is average performing, right? How do we judge what high performing is versus average performing? What does Shaheen have to do for us to think she's high performing? She has to make more targets maybe? And to make more targets, she might have to stay back a little bit later. But Maz might not be able to do that. And actually, is that what the workplace is about or not? So, like the performance-based system we have is based on people doing more than they're actually meant to be doing to earn their salary. And we say that it's actually what we should be targeting. So that's a systems-based thing again. You see, like with children in preschools, we don't ask them to be better than the person next to them. We're not comparing them. We're just going, learn how to build a house. It's a different type of system. So if we don't understand what's behind something, then it becomes problematic. The way that we do it, there's 3 key questions you can ask. The first question is, who does this work for and who doesn't this work for? So say a library, who does an old school library work for and who doesn't it work for? The next question is, why was it made this way? This is where the research comes in, and you go, well, what was the research behind this? You know, we know that organisations have been built the way they have at a particular time in history, post-industrial revolution, to serve a particular purpose. Once we know why, then the next question is how might we reimagine this or change this? If we don't get the why, all we do is blame the people who have benefited. Does that answer that?
Come to the button.
And the wrap-up question, so we can get out of here and get to the pub.
That was your last question. You don't get a bonus question.
No, this is a wrap-up. This is a question for you to then do your closing. So, is one little thing that you'd like to leave everyone with, and as part of that, or in addition to that, how can people support you, get involved, contact you? Over to you. Parting thought, what's your call to action?
Parting thought, think about power structures when you're in any room. That's my parting thought. Very critical, invisible, we don't often see it. It's very hard to. Is this a good question?
What would you like people to do as part of having heard from you, and how can they support your work and get involved? Maybe have a project for you or something like that, you know? What's that?
Have a project. I'll take that.
What would make an awesome project?
So I work with designing inclusive programs. So you're designing any kind of program and you want it to be inclusive, or you're currently running a program, we can do audits for you to see if they are inclusive or not. And kind of showed some of the frameworks that we use. So that's one framework that will actually help us go through each stage of the program to understand whether it's inclusive or not, take a report of it, and then let's just make the world more inclusive.
I don't have a parting thought, actually. I feel like I've talked enough. But if I'm on LinkedIn, if you'd like to connect, and really interested in lots of different things. I do everything from devising AI through process design to training. Yeah, just have a chat.
My parting thoughts would be, I'm just really grateful to be here. I know that's a hashtag gratitude moment, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart. We are living in a really interesting point in time right now. And it's hard to be a human. And I'm speaking to a lot more people who have that weighing really heavily on their hearts, their minds, and their souls. So to be understanding that Ben has run this community now for close to 10 years, and that you all show up and support it. My parting thought would be, keep that hope light, right? Because that's actually what we need to be talking about and we need to be sharing. And so in order, how do you translate into action? Keep coming here, obviously. And if something struck a chord with you, share it. Be the vehicle that is ripple of change. And thank you, because it means the world that you've come to join this conversation.
Perfect closing. Thank you. So one final big thanks to Erez. And Shaheen. And now we get to go to the top. That's for the next one, but thank you. See you. So Hotel CBD, it's on the corner of York and King. Have I got that right? I think I've got that right. Follow the crowd. Thanks everyone. See you soon.